Okay, I have 2 minutes past the hour, so I think this is a good time to get started. My name is Kristen Ehrenberger, and I'm the secretary of the CF Reynolds Medical History Society. I apologize that you can't see my face because the camera in my laptop has died. So I'm talking to you from behind my faculty portrait. Wanted to welcome all of our guests and attendees to the lecture tonight, um, and to tell you a little bit about the reason that we're joining. So, Carol Foster Reynolds, that's what CF Reynolds stands for, joined the University of Pittsburgh in 1947 and became the first director of the Maurice and Laura Falk Library of the Health Professions in 1957. In 1975, he was part of a group that was trying for the third time to start a medical history organization. Unfortunately, he died just 1 month before he was scheduled to retire, and so his colleagues named the C.F. Reynolds Medical History Society in his memory. And since then, we have provided free public lectures on a variety of topics in the health sciences. And I'll take this point to let you know that we do have continuing education credit. So for our nurses and our physicians, I'm encouraging you to text JUBGEN to the 412-312-4424 number. If you're doing continuing education, it's the same number you text all the time, and it's JUBGEN. If you are at all eligible for these credits, I encourage you to register your presence to show the committee that grants continuing education that we have attendees who are interested in this. Even if you don't need the credits, you would help our organization if you would register your presence so that they will continue to let us offer continuing education credits. So I think we'll move on to the next slide, and I will let Adam take over from here.
Good evening, everyone. You can't see me either because I'm the one who's running the slide deck at the moment. But I am Adam Davis. I am the treasurer of the CF Reynolds Medical History Society. And what I wanted to talk to you all about is presumably if you are here right now, you are interested in the history of science and medicine to some extent, or you wandered into the wrong Zoom room, in which case I hope you will become interested in the history of science and medicine before the night is done. But presuming that you're here because you're interested in the history of science and medicine, if you are going to be in the Pittsburgh area this time next year, and you would like to get more involved in the machinery of running events like this involving the history of science and medicine and developing your leadership skills, so having a little something on your CV that contributes to that. The CF Reynolds Medical History Society has, on occasion, partnered with a larger organization, the Southern Association for the History of Medicine and Science, who is going to be bringing their annual conference to Pittsburgh for the very first time next year. We do not have exact dates for this event yet. It will likely be sometime in late February or early March. This is going to be a 3-day conference on the history of science and medicine, hosting a variety of abstracts and papers, panel discussions, guest speakers, and so forth on topics related to the history of science and medicine from any era going back to the classical antiquity all the way up to relatively recent history. History of science, history of medicine, history of nursing, any of those related fields are welcome. Kristen and I are going to be chairing the local organization committee for SAMS 2027. And a couple of things are important about this. Firstly, we are looking for anyone who would be interested in serving on the local arrangements committee for SAMS 2027. There's going to be a lot that we have to do to put together a conference of this scope. This is going to be attracting probably at least 100 people, scholars coming from all over the country and possibly internationally, to join us here to present their research. We are also going to need volunteers on the ground when the conference actually happens for helping distribute badges and other materials to attendees, for helping organize the machinery of the conference while it's happening. Always are going to need people to help keep things running smoothly. And so we will need local people to help make all of that happen. The other thing that's going to be important about this, since I have an audience here right now of people who are science and medical historians or are interested in that, is that in a few months' time, we will be sending out the call for papers for SAMS 2027. And that means that any of you who are interested in these topics and have been thinking somewhere in your head about your pet project in the history of medicine or the history of science or the history of nursing or related fields, this is a fantastic time to get that project polished up and submit an abstract on a paper that you could give, a little 15 or 20 or so minute talk on the topic of your interest. SAMS is a very broad conference that accepts papers on many different subject areas. They never have a theme for the conference that you have to submit around. And they're very welcoming, I should point out, also to student submissions. So even if you're a student and you have an idea for a paper on a topic, that is no obstacle for submitting an abstract related to your research. And we would love to see Pittsburgh very well represented at this event. So if you have an idea or if you have a student or a colleague who you know would be interested in this, please spread the word. If you'd like to get involved, please email us at cfreynoldsmhs at gmail.com, and we'd be more than happy to let you know how you can get involved with helping organize SAMS 2027. And if you'd like us to notify you when the call for papers goes out, please email us there, and we'll make sure that you end up on the mailing list for that so we can make certain that that ends up in your mailbox when that's going to happen, probably not till this summer. But hopefully we'll see a good representation of SAMS there. And even if you're not going to be submitting a paper or getting involved in the organizing committee, hopefully you'll attend that conference and get to network with and hear the research of some really amazing medical history scholars. Our current speaker tonight has been at SAMS a couple times. That's where he and I first met. And it's a fantastic meeting, and we'd love to see you there. By the way, SAMS is also hosting an online conference this year, not in person, happening April 9th and 10th, hosted by the Arkansas College of Health Education. You can go to SAM's website, listed right here, at sams.wildapricot.org for more information about that online conference. It's just a 2-day conference, April 9th and 10th, entirely virtual. So if you'd like to attend that virtually, get an idea of the kind of scholarship that SAM's is putting forward. Obviously, a virtual conference isn't quite the same thing as an in-person one, but it's an opportunity to find out more about the kind of research that SAM scholars are doing.
So our next lecture and the last one for the academic year will be on Tuesday, April 7th at 7 p.m. Colin Elliott will be giving the Jonathan Erlin lecture called The Antonine Plague and the End of Ancient Rome's Golden Era. So we'll hope you'll join us for that. But at the moment, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Ren Capucao. He is a nurse historian and postdoctoral research associate affiliated with the Bjoring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry at the University of Virginia, where he also earned his BA, MSN, and PhD. As a U.S. Fulbright Scholar at the University of the Philippines College of Nursing, he co-authored the book Saving Lives, Raising Standards, The History of UP Nursing, which illustrates the role of the University of the Philippines from U.S. colonization to the COVID-19 pandemic in the national development of the nursing profession. His research and teaching approach the modern history of nursing and healthcare in the Philippines and the United States through a comparative and transnational lens. Through the study of Filipino nurses, he depicts how the success of normative assimilation remains bound to oppressive structures that maintain social inequity, induce vulnerability, and risk and wear down physical and mental health. Listening to his talk over lunch, the word I kept thinking about was burnout. And so now to talk to us about white-capped dreams, the disappearance of Filipino men nurses under the colonial gaze from 1910 to 1945, is Dr. Capucao.
Thank you, Catherine and Adam. Oh, sorry, sorry. Thank you, Kristen and Adam, for the introduction. Sorry, it's been a long day, but bear with me as I share my screen.
Good. Let's vote.
Is that the correct one? Oh, sorry, 1 second.
You want down.
I apologize, everyone. I had to update my Zoom settings real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone. Foremost, like I said, I would like to thank Kristen and Adam for their introductions and their hospitality here in Pittsburgh. I would also like to thank the CF Reynolds Medical History Society for their invitation to be able to speak today and share my work. And so, before delving into the past, I want to begin in the present. In Jessica Helpin's 2008 publication Scrapbooks in American History, a curious entry appears about an early 20th century physician whose collection of clippings, memorabilia, photographs, and writings is described as a self-initiated primer for good citizenship, exemplifying medical professionalism, religious piety, and the American way of life. It paints a rather ordinary picture of the American physician in light of the fact that the physician of interest was not and could not become a US citizen. The physician labeled as Dr. Rodolfo Eladio Sina was Filipino, but his ethnic identity is glossed over and flattened into a linear narrative of progress, assimilation, and success. The entry erases the racialized and colonized experience embedded in the process of becoming a physician and US citizen, to which Dr. Sina's scrapbook functioned as a form of psychological reinforcement. This erasure also obscures the fact that he was foremost a nurse, a career that enabled him to pursue his dream of becoming a physician. Before reading Helfin's book, I learned about Dr. Asina when I visited the archive of the Filipino American National Historical Society in Seattle, Washington in 2017. The archivist, Auntie Dorothy, which for me, I use Auntie as a term of cultural respect and in term of endearment. So when I met the archivist, after learning about my research interests, she directed me to San Mateo, California to meet with her childhood friend. So I made an unexpected trip and befriended Uncle Albert, who shared with me what remained of of his parents' private collections, including his mother's photo albums, which he donated to my institution before passing in 2019. He was the son of Dr. Asina, better known to family and friends as Laddie. His father's scrapbook was no longer in his possession, and unbeknownst to him, became a part of the Jessica Helpin scrapbook collection at Yale University's Benecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, which I stumbled upon in 2022 by randomly searching Laddie's name online. Therefore, archival ethics and the importance of community knowledge also underpin and permeate throughout my interpretation of Laddie's story and this talk. I follow Laddie's journey across the Philippines and the US, which offers a glimpse into the intercolonial existence of Filipino men who bridged nursing and medicine during the first half of the 20th century by using the biographic method. According to historian Sonia Grimpa, this method can restore the rightful place of nurses who have been ignored, misunderstood, or forgotten. Historians Catherine Choi and Christine Peralta demonstrate the biographic method's potential to highlight both the transient and permanent lives of Filipino nurse leaders in the US during the first half of the 20th century. I contribute to the historiography of Filipino nurses during this period by foregrounding men's care work, namely the paid and unpaid labor involved in assisting others with daily activities of living. as well as the unseen creative labor that Asian Americanist Alan Punzal Isaac describes as necessary to connect with people, to establish relationships, and to project futures for others and ourselves that guide the everyday. This definition of care work allows me to foreground the history of Filipino male trained nurses alongside domestic servants, orderlies, and hospital attendants during the first half of the 20th century. These roles, which I collectively classify as men in nursing, often overlapped in identity and thereby blurring their roles in terms of duty. They reveal how the colonial gaze rendered the racialized subject as effeminate, deviant, and inferior, and thus holding the capacity for care work. Simultaneously, their care work helps us understand not only the formation of the nursing profession, but also acknowledge their labor across healthcare and the community. Moreover, my analysis builds upon historical studies on the racialization and gendering of colonized male nurses, whose identities and work transgress gender norms and professional boundaries in healthcare. But unlike previous studies, I explore male nurses' mobility beyond the colony. In this talk, I will begin by surveying the history of modern medicine in the Philippines and how, under US colonialism, the cultural status of the physician was deployed to recruit male students into nursing. This provides the necessary context to understand Laddie's racially gendered identity as a colonized male nurse, as well as his aspirations to become a physician and travel to the metropole. I will then trace his journey to enter medical school and become a physician in the US. But first, I will explain how I use intersectional disability studies to approach Laddie's biography. Through ableism and its interlocking with other systems of oppression, disability reveals the discursive logic used to value, differentiate, and incapacitate groups as outside the normative values of bodies, minds, and behaviors. It rationalizes structural inequality, which in turn produces social environments that discriminate those marked as disabled. For racialized and colonized populations, disabilities, socio-political, and medical production are inextricable when viewing the relationship between precarity and health disparities. To illustrate the production of disability, I use the concept of weathering coined by public health scholar Arlene Geronimus. Weathering refers to the sustained biological response to stress arising from interactions among the body, mind, and social environment, which wears down health over time. It describes the ordinary experiences of hopeful, hardworking, responsible, skilled, and resilient people dying from the physical toll of constant stress on their bodies, paying with their health because they live in a rigged, degrading, and exploitative system. Laddie's biography reveals how weathering loomed over the ordinary lives of Filipino men in nursing in the US, including aspirations to become physicians during the first half of the 20th century. Their intersectional identity placed them at odds with the ideal physician configured through the ableist logic of the medical profession. Filipino men thus had to demonstrate their labor capacity for medicine by adhering to American cultural norms, such as hard work and determination, and by playing by the rules in a society that was structurally disabling. This lifelong endurance, I argue, eroded the health of Filipino men in nursing, thereby affecting their ability to become physicians in the metropole. Conversely, it uncovers the temporal rhythms of these men and how their care work, eligible to capitalist exploitation, extended the lives of those around them, as evidenced by the life and times of Laddie. Born in 1893, Laddie grew up during a time when the physician embodied the modern subject and became a figure of distinction in the Philippine cultural imagination. As one American physician noted, quote, to be a doctor in those days meant opportunities for political advancement and prominence. From the medical profession came from the Filipino political leaders, Filipino businessmen, Filipino generals, and Filipino statesmen, end quote. Modern medicine in the Philippines first emerged under Spanish rule as colonial authorities implemented scientific methods and amid cholera pandemics in the 19th century. These outbreaks demonstrated the need for locally trained physicians, leading to the 1871 establishment of the University of Santo Tomas, Faculty of Medicine and Pharmacy, the first Western medical school in Southeast Asia. Nonetheless, the institution reproduced the racially gendered colonial order by restricting admission to men and offering only the licentiate degree, which granted the right to practice, not the title of doctor. Therefore, to become medical doctors or receive specialized training, Filipino men were required to attend the Central University of Madrid or other European institutions of higher education. The privileged few who studied abroad absorbed liberal ideals of individualism, scientific rationality, and social progress. which they considered incompatible with Spanish colonialism. Upon returning to the islands, they championed Filipino nationalism, both within and beyond their medical practice, and many held leadership roles during the Philippine Revolution in the fight for independence from Spain. At the close of the 19th century, the medical profession superseded the priesthood as the most popular profession among young men, with the physician becoming an abstraction of power, prestige, and the perfectibility of man on earth. In the decade following 1898, the physician became a site of contestation upon the colonial transfer of the Philippines to the US. Filipino physicians' cultural status, knowledge, and sheer number, according to historians Reynaldo Leto and Rodney Sullivan, derailed the exceptionalist narrative that only through US intervention could civilization and the gospel of medicine spread across the islands. Therefore, American colonial discourse largely denigrated Filipino physicians' professional capacity around Orientalist stereotypes of indolence, infantility, effeminacy, and backwardness, and their deficient medical education relative to US standards. It demonstrated an ableist logic that reified the colonial order and secured control over modern medicine and the narrative of progress. Despite this control, the path to becoming a physician became more accessible to both the elite and the common people under the American educational system. The US insular government, unlike its Spanish predecessor, instituted public schools that democratized knowledge and socialized Filipinos into the American way of life. This embedded a linear relationship between education and social mobility within the Philippine cultural imagination. Moreover, in 1903, the insular government established the Pensionado program, which primarily funded the education of Filipino elites at US universities and hospitals, with the expectation that they would return to the Philippines and further its development. Many pensionados, or government scholars, elected to study medicine and later become prominent figures in the islands. Still, for most Filipinos, access to higher education, whether at home or abroad, remains a privilege reserved for the upper social strata. Nursing training schools, however, proved to be an exception and even paved the way to medicine. Modern nursing, unlike medicine, emerged as an American import, and inasmuch as the metropole, its accessibility offered a mechanism, particularly for men, to overcome the financial strain of medical school. In general, nursing training schools offered free tuition, room and board, and a small stipend. In general, nursing training schools, this freed students from debt and prepared them for employment immediately after graduation, enabling them to begin accruing income for future endeavors. For those interested in pursuing medicine, nursing was particularly attractive because it offered a foundation in scientific and medical knowledge and clinical exposure to physicians. The use of nursing as a route to medicine, as historian Barbara Manuel observes, represented a more masculine perspective of acquiring education and power, which was attuned to the heteropatriarchal values that transpose gender differences between the nurse and the physician. In the Philippines, the idea of nursing as a stepping stone to medicine went beyond individual agency and was institutionalized as a recruitment strategy to attract male students. The insular government discovered early on that men were needed to care for male patients in civil hospitals and undertake the work of developing the healthcare infrastructure in areas deemed too harsh and rugged for women. Therefore, in 1910, the training of male nurses coincided with the government's opening of the Philippine General Hospital and its co-educational training school that prepared men and women together in general nursing. In the school's first catalog, nursing was advertised as, quote, a valuable preliminary for those intending to ultimately take up the broader profession of medicine, end quote. This recruitment strategy intentionally capitalized on the physician's cultural status. While not directly attributable, it correlated with the high enrollment of male students during the training school's early years. In 1913, the school graduated its first cohort of 26 male students, alongside 27 female students. The insular government thus played an important role in popularizing nursing as a respectable profession among men. Yet this respectable image of the male nurse in the colony starkly contrasted with that of the metropole. Also in 1913, John Allen Hornsby, an American Medical Association officer and a prominent figure in the medical efficiency movement, published The Modern Hospital, a widely circulated text among hospital administrators and physicians, which cast male nurses as inefficient and antiquated. Quote, the male nurse has usually some overpowering failing, some inherent weakness that forbids success in any permanent line of human endeavor, In other words, the male nurses have been nearly always a failure, end quote. His characterization reflected how, by the turn of the 20th century, scientific management and social Darwinism predominated intellectual thought and functioned to economize the modern hospital along the lines of race, gender, sexuality, and class. The male nurse challenged evolutionary theories associating gender role differentiation with human civilization and, by extension, racial progress. Nevertheless, Hornsby, with reservations, stated that male nurses still had their use for certain special services and in special places. These special places may have alluded to sites of imperial conquest, where the positioning of racialized populations outside of civilization made their labor capacities pliable. Drawing on insights from historians of global domestic service, a trans-colonial culture emerged in the 19th century and persisted into the 1920s, which normalized and favored non-white men in care work. For instance, colonial economies capacitated male domestic servants by linking their racialized masculinity to women's work, while also colloquially labeling them as boys to mitigate perceived sexual threats against white women in the home. Put differently, the ableist technologies of feminization and infantilization propped up the colonial order and economy. Filipino male nurses thus interpolated and insulated white imperial manhood by embodying a deviant masculinity that symbolized their racial regression rather than progress. To be sure, in stating the mission of the nurse to the 1915 class of the Philippine General Hospital, Secretary of the Interior, Winfred Dennison, credited male nurses' masculinity to the advancement of the profession and the nation, but then implored male graduates to apply the tenderness of women in their work. His appeal to embrace feminine sensibilities as a form of professional empowerment starkly contrasted with the US ideal of heteronormativity, thereby reifying the deviant masculinity of Filipino men. Moreover, Jennison claimed that this tender masculinity would enable men to have broader career prospects than their female counterparts. His assertion proved largely false, as the demand for male nurses significantly declined by 1925. Their primary role as sanitary inspectors was overtaken by graduates of specialized sanitation courses, which could prepare sanitary inspectors in less than a year, compared to the 3-year nursing curriculum. This ushered the feminization of Philippine nursing and realigned the profession with its gendered origins. However, as historians of nursing have shown, the blurring of gender roles was not only ushered by the colonial state, but also by the male nurses. In the Philippines, the pioneering work of male nurses contributed to the degendering of the Philippine General Hospital's nursing curriculum. The curriculum, for the most part, exhibited gender parity, except for a few gender-specific courses. For male students, these courses included administration and sanitation, but the curriculum underwent a major shift through the pioneering work of male nurses who, as the only health practitioners in their field assignments, reported being increasingly called upon by locals to attend childbirth. The reports led the training school to require that all students take obstetrics courses. This curricular change correlated with the island's high rate of infant mortality, which, as anthropologist Bonnie McElhinney notes, became an index of civilization used to refute the readiness of Philippine independence. In advocating for communities without access to health care, Filipino male nurses viewed the delivery of babies as a duty not restricted by gender norms. Their impact on the overall health of the islands challenged American nurses' preconceptions about the gendered identity of the nurse. Filipino men's prosperity for the profession particularly confounded American nursing leaders Lavinia Dock and Isabel Stewart, who observed that, quote, the young women are equally keen, but we are more accustomed to finding enthusiasm for nursing and health in women than men, end quote. These leaders viewed Filipino male nurses in a manner comparable to their Chinese counterparts, whose care work was described as both unusual and touching. By invoking gender as a referent, their praise appeared insincere as it draws attention to the racialized deviance of male nurses. Yet, a closer read reveals that American nurses struggled to direct the professionalization of nursing extended into the colonies where they were unable to bar men's entry. Nonetheless, American nurses proved effective in preventing male nurses from obtaining government and private scholarships for professional advancement in the US. This ensured that male nurses remained confined to the islands, a circumstance that amidst the profession's feminization, spelled their disappearance. However, male nurses, such as Laddie, continued imagining the possibilities of nursing that defied colonial expectations, and they carved their own career paths by self-funding trips to the metropole. For Laddie, nursing was a means to an end to study medicine in the metropole, and his journey to becoming a nurse began serendipitously. During the August 1916 strike of more than 100 student nurses, the Philippine General Hospital expedited telegrams to applicants on its training school's extensive waiting list. These telegrams granted admission and ordered recipients to report to the hospital immediately. One telegram traveled over 200 miles north to the town of Vigan, inviting Laddie, who was 25 at the time, to join the class of 1919. He was not the first in his family to attend the training school, as his younger sister, Jacinta, had graduated a year earlier. Moreover, he was not the only person from his hometown invited to join the 1919 class, as Felicidad Nolasco also received a telegram. She quickly caught Laddie's attention at the training school, and the two began dating. The training school indiscriminately policed the sexual behaviors of students as the capacity to nurse derived from one's moral character. Yet the emergence of sexual desires and budding romances in a co-educational institution was inevitable, as the journal entries of a female student nurse from the prior class intimated. In one entry, the physiology instructor inquired, "What is the work of the heart?" A male student responded, quote, "The heart beats irregularly, especially when one seeks his Venus," end quote. Indeed, Laddie's relationship with Felicidad remained steady during their time at school. If they were to marry right after graduation, they would be foreclosed from pursuing their personal aspirations. The sexual lives of male and female nurses continued to be regulated after graduation by the profession's middle-class sociality, which, as historians of nursing have noted, culturally viewed work and marriage as incompatible, thereby foreclosing many opportunities for work and professional advancement among married persons. Neither Laddie nor Felicidad was ready to let these opportunities pass, as both led independent lives, each with their own goals. She yearned to visit new places and experience the world, while he aspired to study medicine in the metropole. In April 1919, the couple graduated together as trained nurses, but parted ways not long after, as within the same month, Laddie, now 28, embarked on his journey to the metropole. He noted on his US passport application that he intended to remain abroad for 10 years, but the length of stay was merely a formality. As determined by the 1901 Insular Cases, Filipinos were legally classified as non-citizen US nationals. Their liminal status prevented them from exercising constitutional civil rights and naturalizing as US citizens, but it allowed them to circumvent immigration restrictions barring other Asian nationalities and legally remain abroad. Throughout his journey, he used writing as an expressive outlet. So before docking at San Francisco on June 20, he crafted a poem that exemplified his religious faith, hair ethic, and exuberance for what awaited him. Once in the metropole, he would join the majority of Filipino men who outnumbered women by a ratio of 14 to 1. Some men came as pensionados. Others arrived through enlistment in the U.S. Armed Services. Most paid for their own passage and education, though. Laddie's migration experience mirrored that of the last group, whose collective subjectivity, as Filipino-American historians have demonstrated, was forged by an Americanized education, stories circulating the islands from Filipino returnees, and educational aspirations for a better life for themselves and their families, which in turn guided their migration abroad to the purported land of opportunity. With faith in the American way of life, Laddie had to complete pre-medical science requirements equating to about 2 years of college, which was a growing standard for medical school admission. From California, he trekked north to where a Filipino community had formed in Washington state. According to historian Dorothy Fujita Roney, Seattle was a trans-Pacific site that attracted Filipinos from across the US empire seeking education and the social mobility it conferred. Filipinos moving to and from Seattle circulated information about the University of Washington as a premier educational institution in the Northwest that welcomed Asian migrants. This knowledge guided Laddie to Seattle, where he enrolled at the University of Washington on a pre-medical track and joined the Filipino Club, and the Pre-Medic Society during the 1919-1920 academic year. His studies were part of a peak period of Filipino enrollment at the university in the first half of the mid-20th century, when approximately 100 students were enrolled. Sorry, sticky pages. Most Filipino men self-funded their education by either working while attending school or taking breaks from school to earn money and resume their studies later. Their choices for work were limited to menial labor, and the most common positions consisted of farmhands, cannery workers, and domestic servants. The first two jobs often went together as seasonal labor that required constant movement across the West Coast. Like in the colony, domestic service was made available to Filipino men, but there were fewer opportunities. This line of work was highly sought after because it allowed students to remain in one location, which was an optimal arrangement for those seeking to work while attending school. Similarly, the less studied position of the orderly or male hospital attendant also enabled them to be rooted in place. The orderly was the gendered counterpart to nurse aides and assistants, but all of these ancillary positions were supervised by white female nurses. In the US, the orderly position was highly unpopular. It occupied the lowest rung of the hospital hierarchy, which mirrored the status of those considered the dregs of society. Both groups were attributed with impairment, sexual deviancy, dependency, and poverty. The words of one physician echoed the popular sentiment regarding orderlies as, quote, persons broken down in health or embarrassed financially who took the jobs because no other work was available, end quote. Orderlies received little to no training in patient care, including delivering food trays, giving baths, assisting with ambulation, and toileting. Despite their usefulness in the hospital, their devaluation was entwined with their status as male caregivers, transgressing a feminine space. Orderlies, alongside male nurses, were the only positions in the hospital subjected to female oversight, a pattern that inverted gender norms. These two roles often collapsed into one another, with the term orderly used both interchangeably with and pejoratively towards male nurses. The orderly position was sometimes the only available nursing role for men in hospitals, resulting in professional deskilling and pay cuts. As historian Susan Reverby notes, the capacity to nurse and nursing success as a profession was built on the limiting and degrading of others, outside the image of the ideal nurse as white and female. This curtailed male nurses' efforts in advocating for gender parity within the profession, as American nursing leadership doubled down that only the trained sensibility of a middle-class woman could alone bring order and morality to the hospital's grim wards. Unsurprisingly, male nurses composed less than 5% of the US nursing labor force by the 1920s. This percentage likely excluded those assigned to orderly positions, such as Laddie, but his training in general nursing set him apart from those with professional recognition, most of whom had completed specialized programs in psychiatric or genitourinary nursing. Indeed, the demand for orderlies and their lowly status created an ideal opportunity for Filipino men with prior hospital experience. Laddie's nursing background helped him secure employment as an orderly at the Seattle General Hospital, and his knowledge of surgical nursing may have privileged his assignment in the operating room, which male nursing leaders claimed as a scientific space compatible with men's inherent aptitude for technology and machinery. This position offered him notable benefits: stable employment, clinical exposure, and the luxury of immobility. Although his new job would have allowed him to remain enrolled at the University of Washington, he withdrew from his studies after completing his first year to work full-time. Yet this did not prevent him from learning, as he acquired experiential knowledge by working closely with physicians and observing surgical procedures. His position as an orderly did not stray from his dream of becoming a physician. Rather, it offered a pragmatic opportunity to study medicine informally and set aside savings for medical school. Laddie's transition from student to orderly was a personal choice that marked a slowing in pace toward medical school, particularly as his family joined him abroad. Toward the end of 1921, he was joined by his younger siblings, Monaco and Jacinta, and his cousin, Bernardo. His standing at the hospital opened opportunities for his brother and cousin, who were employed as a kitchen worker and an orderly, respectively. Bernardo had no prior experience in nursing, but his role as an orderly enabled him to focus more effectively on his studies at the University of Washington and explore his interest in health-related careers. Laddie, as a dutiful older brother, dedicated his time to work and pooled his earnings towards his siblings' education, notably toward Jacinta's aspiration to become a physician. Putting family ahead of himself, he postponed his plans to support his sister in the wearing journey to become a physician. Despite the lack of detailed accounts on the medical journeys of Filipinos in the US, insights can be comparatively drawn through the experiences of Black medical students and graduates during the first half of the 20th century, which, as medical historians show, were impacted by professionalization movements in medicine shaped by ideologies of race, gender, and disability. In 1910, the Flexner Report examined the state of medical education in the US and Canada and recommended standardizing medical schools' admission criteria and curricula. It also called for medical patriotism, which stressed the need for a homogeneous body of skilled physicians to maintain the profession's efficiency. This homogeneity, as historian Moya Bailey asserts, located ability among wealthy northern white men. They embodied the ideal physician, the corporeal and cognitive standard for measuring the capacity to practice medicine and for configuring the profession's social hierarchy. This hierarchy is illustrated by historian Kenneth Ludmerer's example of a Black female physician who, despite her exemplary marks in medical school, was passed over for a hospital internship in favor of a one-armed white male physician capable of performing the necessary manual tasks. In locating Black female physicians' social position in medicine, his example also depicts how race and gender prove greater handicaps than physical disability. Race, in particular, according to historian Vanessa Gamble, provided an overarching schema governing the capacity to practice medicine. It became a teleological explanation for the poor educational outcomes and mortality of Black medical students and graduates in integrated northern hospitals. Those who endured medical school continued to brace against the weathering that followed. Filipino American historians offer a glimpse into the outcomes of Filipino medical journeys by illustrating how structural barriers prevented Filipino migrants from entering careers in male dominated white collar professions. Filipinos, particularly in California and the Pacific Northwest, could obtain professional degrees, but this did not guarantee a job in their field of study. There was a clear disconnect between educational attainment and social mobility. Even Filipinos who came abroad with medical degrees found themselves unable to practice medicine and were relegated to menial labor. Hence, while Filipinos could graduate from medical schools, the likelihood of them working as physicians in the US was encumbered by race and citizenship status. During the 1920s, medical licensing and nativist movements intersected to herald citizenship as a marker of professionalism. The requirements of full citizenship and filing a declaration of intent for naturalization to sit for board examinations and obtain professional licenses were a growing trend that state medical boards applied unevenly. Boards that demanded full citizenship effectively denied licenses to aliens and non-citizens because they were ineligible for naturalization. Notwithstanding the structural barriers to practicing medicine, Laddie's unwavering conviction to see the educational achievement of his sister led him to work additional jobs alongside being an orderly and to endure the strain on his body and mind. In 1926, his persistence paid off when his sister completed her pre-medical requirements at the University of Washington and was admitted to the Marquette University School of Medicine in Milwaukee. He continued to financially support his sister through medical school, but knowing she was one step closer to becoming a physician gave him a sense of relief that allowed him to refocus on his own goals. He took a respite from work and the thought of medical school to travel to New York, where he reconnected with Felicidad, a face he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. How the two kept in touch and to what extent remain ambiguous. When they met in person, though, time stood still, as if nothing had changed since their training school days. For them, now was the right time for marriage. The way they experienced time non-linearly was expressed in their civil ceremony in Manhattan on October 4, 1928. The newlyweds, 37 and 36, respectively, falsified their ages on their marriage certificates to appear 10 years younger. The recorded ages reflected the last time they saw each other. Their slow temporality resisted the normative progression of the life course, including marriage and career milestones, and enabled them to find beauty in ordinary moments and imagine a just world where they could flourish. The newlyweds continued to remain outside normative time, living apart for nearly 2 years before Felicidad was living apart for nearly 2 years because Felicidad was unready to leave New York. Still, the two traveled across the country to see each other, which included celebrating a traditional Catholic wedding in Seattle and exploring the Eastern Seaboard together. Despite their happiness, Felicidad had concerns about Laddie's well-being because of his dream of becoming a physician had made little progress. For as long as Felicidad had known him, he had talked fervently about becoming a physician. She blamed his slow pace on his sister's selfishness, but Laddie chose to support his sister. Felicidad's trepidations about Laddie's care work for others over a decade insinuates how caring can be disabling, a relationship teased out by feminist scholar Talia Schaefer, who postulates the stress of performing industry while suppressing one's own wishes is an acute form of suffering, one that can best be expressed through the metaphor of a dire disease. However, for Laddie, the dire disease was insidiously manifesting from the weathering involved with living in sync with core American values of working hard and playing by the rules in an unjust society. Felicidad's refusal to leave New York may have been her own act of care, affording Laddie more time to work towards his dream before they settle down to build a family together. However, his slow pace in entering medical school was no longer a choice, but a structural constraint. By 1929, Washington state implemented a policy requiring Filipino high school graduates, or sorry, requiring Filipinos, sorry, Washington state implemented a policy requiring Filipinos high school graduates to complete 1 year at an in-state high school as a prerequisite for college admission. This policy reflected the prevalence of nativism and anti-Asian racism in the West, exacerbated by the economic downturn of the Great Depression, which also refashioned the formerly friendly disposition of the University of Washington toward Asian nationals. The university's enrollment of Filipino students declined to approximately 40 due to the implementation of a $50 non-resident fee. The changes in educational policy effectively disparaged chances for social advancement. Still, Laddie was adamant about completing the education he had begun nearly a decade ago, so he re-enrolled in high school. On August 8, 1930, he received his diploma at the age of 39. Shortly after his graduation, Felicidad relocated permanently to Seattle because she was now pregnant. So Laddie's attention once again was drawn away from medical school. By the late 1920s, Seattle, as a major immigration port, became a hotbed for racial violence amidst the influx of Filipino migrants. The virulence of anti-Filipino racism became quite palpable as it entwined with anxieties associated with the Great Depression and a nationwide epidemic of meningitis. According to a national public health report, meningitis only manifested clinical symptoms in less than 1% of infections. Yet its case fatality among the symptomatic was approximately 50%. The post risk of death alongside labor competition stirred white anxieties toward Filipinos in Seattle. As public health historians illustrate, the scapegoating of ethnic minorities as diseased, disabled, and immoral was a common tactic deployed by public health officials to regulate non-white bodies as undeserving of US citizenship and the protection it conferred. On February 25, 1929, the SS President Lincoln arrived in the city with hundreds of Filipinos, 12 of whom in steerage had confirmed cases of meningitis, requiring hospitalization. Instead of problematizing the overcrowding and poor ventilation of the steerage class, a Seattle Times article conflated the disease with being Filipino, asserting that, quote, Seattle should not be made a dumping ground for carriers of an epidemic disease. Our city, hospital, always crowded, is no place for treating them, end quote. The article connected the discourses of pathologization and dependency to characterize the Filipino as a foreign body that drains health and economic resources from deserving citizens. The strong sentiments against Filipinos reflected the Philippine status as the only Asian country without restrictions on migration. During the meningitis outbreak in Seattle, Filipino men continued to occupy orderly positions in hospitals due to the undesirable nature of these roles. The same could not be said for trained nurse positions, as hospitals prioritized the hiring of white women amidst the recession. Therefore, the only jobs available for Filipino women were those also deemed as undesirable, such as those dealing with contagious diseases and ethnic populations. At Berlin Sanatorium, located at the outskirts of the city, The flagrant racism and hiring practices led Felicidad to abandon finding work at hospitals and instead open a quite unsuccessful boarding house business in her and Laddie's home. The pair managed to live comfortably because of Laddie's work as an orderly and the additional household income from family and friends living with them. This non-nuclear housing arrangement with shifting tenants became a community of care that not only alleviated financial difficulties, but also shared responsibility for raising Albert, Felicidad's and Laddie's son. This interdependency allowed Laddie to focus on his education. In 1934, rather than re-enroll at the University of Washington, he enrolled at Seattle College, which was within walking distance of his home and workplace, to better manage his time. This allowed him to earn credits before returning to the University of Washington. Amid rising admission standards at medical schools, he resolved to earn his baccalaureate degree to become a competitive applicant. Laddie had to work harder and smarter because the Filipino problem in the West had been addressed nationally through the passage of the Tydings-McDuffie Act earlier in the year. The act granted the Philippines independence after a 10-year period, but immediately reclassified Filipinos from non-citizen nationals to aliens and restricted immigration from the Philippines to a quota of 50 persons per year. It was followed a year later by the Filipino Repatriation Act, which subsidized the voluntary return of Filipinos to the Philippines. Their change in legal status created uncertainty for those hoping to access higher education or obtain medical licensure, as citizenship requirements for both remained under debate. In 1937, Laddie filed a declaration of intention for U.S. citizenship as evidence of his allegiance to the American way of life, and in doing so, became eligible for the draft. The voluntary filing helped assuage his anxieties surrounding the volatility of the political climate, university admissions criteria, and licensure requirements in the medical profession. The following year, the American Medical Association submitted a resolution to the Federation of State Medical Boards requesting the standardization of citizenship as a requirement for medical licensure examinations. The physician's duty, asserted J. Early McIntyre, the secretary of the Michigan State Board of Registration in Medicine, was incompatible with alien nationality, which he determined was a clear factor of unfitness to practice. He deemed the alien who could meet American moral standards was the exception rather than the rule. His ruling reflected how nativist and racist discourses continued to shape who had the capacity to practice medicine, thereby regulating the profession's demography. Despite the turbulent times, Laddie began inquiring about medical school admissions. One of the first responses he received was from the University of Kansas School of Medicine, which promptly rebuffed him in a letter stating that the institution admitted only in-state residents. This did not hamper Laddie's momentum, who persevered through his education. Now 51 years old, he received his baccalaureate degree from the University of Washington in 1942. His attention was now fixed on entering medical school. He continued preparing medical school applications as the US entered the Second World War. The wartime period created more lucrative opportunities, so he resigned from his orderly position at Seattle General Hospital to garner higher wages as an electrician at the shipyards. This enabled him to better accrue savings to cover the costs of medical school. Even Felicidad emerged from reclusion as the war had created a domestic shortage of nurses, so she found work at Columbus Hospital. In May 1943, Laddie obtained letters of recommendation for his medical school applications from individuals who could attest his potential to become an outstanding physician. One letter was written by his Catholic pastor at St. James Cathedral, where he had been a parishioner since 1919. The other two letters came from physicians whom Laddie worked under as an orderly at the Seattle General Hospital. The two physicians spoke highly of his capacity as both physician and U.S. citizen, but both referred to him as boy, a disabling rhetoric that reinforced the racialized colonial order. Moreover, their use of boy blatantly ignored that Laddie was middle-aged, so these physicians' language revealed how aging was disembodied from racialized subjects who continued to be perceived temporally outside of progress. Finally, after a quarter of a century in the US, Laddie received admission offers to several medical schools, ultimately choosing to attend the Loyola University Chicago School of Medicine in 1945. Despite reaching this significant milestone, the weathering he endured had taken a toll on his body, which he alludes to in the final stanza of a prayer he wrote before beginning medical school. Quote, Lord, strengthen me when tired and worn. Tired hands, though skilled, often fumble. Make my tired hands be more nimble. Give me power to carry on. End quote. His words, while affirming, were less optimistic than his writings at the start of the journey. They paint a portrait of an aged, tired man, showing concern about his ability to press on. At school, he stood out amongst the freshman class, not only because of his race, but also because of his age. He was 54 years old, and his body was worn down by the debilitating effects of structural violence. The chronic stress was intangible, but its accumulation over the years had led to physiological manifestations. His time as a medical student lasted several weeks before he made the difficult decision to withdraw for health reasons. He returned to Seattle, where he was hospitalized shortly thereafter at his former workplace, Seattle General Hospital. On October 14, 1945, at 8:25 p.m., the date and time were called for Laddie's death, in which the medical cause was attributed to arteriosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. Ultimately, Laddie's dream of becoming a physician remained unfinished amid the persistence of structural inequality in the metropole. His narrative portrayed the debilitating effects of weathering that arise from striving to live beyond one's imposed capacity in an unjust society. It also revealed the complexities of care. Although Laddie's relentless care work for others proved disabling for him, it catalyzed others' dreams. For instance, his own cousin Bernardo went on to have a successful career, earning his Master of Science in Pharmacy and Doctor of Philosophy in Chemistry at the University of Washington by 1940. His success is part of a care chain set off by Laddie, who housed him and found him a job as an orderly upon his arrival. This care chain reaction included his sister, Jacinta, who earned a Doctor of Medicine degree from Marquette University in 1931. Both Jacinta and Bernardo, after completing their studies, returned to the Philippines, where it may have been the only way for Filipinos to put what they had learned into practice during the first half of the 20th century. I would like to conclude by revisiting Helpin's scrapbooks and address its identification of Laddie as Dr. Asina with two interpretations. The first interpretation directly critiques the erroneous bestowal of the title, which reifies the idea that embodying the American way of life and its tenets of individualism, progress, hard work, and determination made the dream of upward mobility a universal experience. Through a careful reading of Laddie's biography, we see how, uh, uh, despite aligning with core American values, social differences erected structural barriers that precluded his dream of becoming a physician. Moreover, the improper title reproduces gender norms and obscures histories of men in nursing and their racialized and colonized experiences. Laddie's plans after medical school remain unknown, but if he were to graduate and remain in the metropole, he would most likely be unable to practice as a physician. Hence, the label of Dr. Asina covers up how working hard can be a symptom associated with long histories of weathering the debilitating effects of racialized hostility and violence. The second interpretation of the posthumous doctorate holds that Laddie's care work was inextricable from his embodiment of time. His decision to delay his own career to care for his family can be perceived either as time stolen or time invested. The latter prioritizes interdependence, which Laddie valued, so his care work and other success are entangled. In this case, the title of doctor symbolizes him living vicariously through his sister and cousin. Moreover, his slow temporality allowed him to resist, survive, and imagine otherwise in an unjust world. Laddie's non-normative experience of time thus enables us to frame his posthumous title of Dr. Asina as conferred out of time, yet also right on his time. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my talk. I'll stop sharing. Cool. Does anyone have any questions?
And if you do have questions, you can either raise your hand here or you can put your questions in the chat.
Do you have plans to publish this story? Yes, actually, it is going to be, this is chapter 3 in my upcoming book with the University of Illinois Press under their Disability History series. So I'm still tinkering around with the story, but this story always gets me emotional because of how, I guess, it's personal, but it's also following it has been such a privilege to be able to bear these stories. So yeah, it will be published hopefully in 2 years.
Yeah, I see we have a question from Ifeanyi. If you want to unmute yourself to ask, go right ahead.
Hey, Ren. Great talk. Thank you so much. I had a specific question about, so we talked a little bit about how people just go into work and especially minorities. I saw during my time in pharmacy school where a lot was going on during the COVID area, and me and my friends just kind of put our heads down, went to work where all this craziness was happening. Did you experience anything similar when you were in nursing school?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? My hearing stopped so great.
That's okay. So mainly my question was just, did you see any parallels? Like we talked about lying, just putting their head down, going to work when they were in
Yeah.
school. Just a lot of the racial, animosities going towards them. So I was wondering, do you experience anything like similar like that going to school when you were in, nursing school, or see any
I see.
parallels?
So there's two ways I could answer this question. Just first off, just thinking about the colonial legacies of nursing, seeing how Filipino nurses they contributed they were they were a disproportionate number of deaths during the COVID pandemic, and that is more of a structural kind of violence associated with the colonial legacy. But in terms of my experience, I've actually had several experiences in dealing with racism as when I was a nursing student. But the hard part is I think it's different with I've noticed with the Asian healthcare providers, Asian American healthcare providers, um, from the two different from the several units I've been across, it's always kind of like anti Asian racisms are kind of always pushed up to the side, and so it's kind of frustrating, like how it's kind of passed over. And I remember with one experience I had, it always stuck with me as a really early, this was just my second rotation in psych. Like we had a bipolar patient, right? She's undergoing an episode, but then she said something racist towards me, which I can handle just because I've had to do it my whole life. But the problem was when I came out, my preceptor, who was a white male, like he was fine. Like we were cool, we were fine. It's just that then he asked me to apologize to that patient after saying that racist remark to me, and I didn't go back to clinical for a week because I was so disheartened. And so there's all of these undercover like racisms within like nursing that are it's harder to bring out. But yeah, no, like yeah, nursing can be it's quite a journey. But yeah, I'm hoping you haven't experienced anything like I have. But thank you for the question.
Thank you for your response, Ren.
Do we have any other questions for Dr. Capucao tonight?
Hi, my name is Merle. Uh, I'm a nurse, I'm a retired nurse, but it's not only male nurses that experience racism. Even as female nurses, there are times that we are told by white patients or American patients that would say, I want somebody who can speak English to take care of me. And that by itself it hurts you because we Filipinos can really speak the language or can speak English, although we have the intonation maybe that sounds different from the American English. So just to reiterate, it's not only male nurses, but female nurses or foreign nurses, Filipino American nurses are also experience racism at workplace, not only by patients and by coworkers.
Thank you for your additional commentary. I didn't want to. I hope I didn't imply that it was just male nurses. When I was answering that question, it was just focused on the Asian American community of healthcare providers. But thank you, and I appreciate your comment.
Anybody else? All right. Well, if that is all, then once again, I'd love to thank Dr. Capucao for an amazing talk and for coming to Pittsburgh to speak to us. This was fantastic. It was great hearing about your research and your experience. I'm very much looking forward to when you do publish this. And great to have had you here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.
And hopefully you'll be joining us again for SAMS 2027. And hopefully we always welcome to have you back at CF Reynolds. We'll be having our next meeting at about a little over a month. And hope to see you there as well. Online, obviously. All right. Hope you all have a good night.
Take care, everyone.